Today we're going to talk about AI, but before we dive in, perhaps you could share a little bit about who you are and what you do. I know you have quite an interesting life.
Ah, I'm 65, so there's a lot to say, right? I mean, that's not a matter of being an interesting guy. I mean, it's a function of being an old guy. However, uh, I've bounced around an awful lot in my life, and again in mathematics. I was a very promising mathematics guy when I was 15. I was at uni, and then I discovered alcohol. So that kind of took its toll in the next 15 years of my life, where there was this kind of raging battle between the Dr. Heckle and the Mr. Hyde. I ended up working on Wall Street and not in science, which is a great tragedy because I kind of was a pretty promising young fella in science, and then I went into management consulting. And I needed to clean up my addiction and mental health issues. And right about the time I wanted to do that is I went into organizational change and organizational psychology and human psychology. And when I was about 32, initially it was partly I needed to heal myself. But then I brought that work to organizations. Uh, so a lot of the work I did in organizational change, organizational psychology, eventually in coaching, facilitation, working in the mental health arena, etc. All of that was initially birthed out of I got to do something about me because for all my intellectual challenge, I was a basket case when I was 32 years old. So I bounced off a bottom there and built, how many years is it now? Good heavens, 33 years career in management consulting, which has been including being an executive of IBM, their thought leader on future work, remote working, yada, 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 much like your previous guest, Susan Petrell. I was also ran my own coaching firm. I had like 50 coaches working for me for a while. I worked at PricewaterhouseCoopers for a while. And then about 10 years ago, I decided I want to write books because I always wanted to write books. Funny thing is, I I'd never hardly written a word before I was 53. I did a science degree at uni. You don't have to, you don't write anything down. Certainly not any prose. So I probably arrived at 53 a pretty substandard writer. But I'd always wanted to write, and I started writing books about 10 years ago and have written 8, trying to write about one a year. I'm thinking of writing one called Curiosity, the human superpower, which I don't think anybody has claimed yet, because I do think that that's fundamental. Is fundamentally, I think, what made us thrive as a species: curiosity and collaboration, you might
Yeah.
say. But also today, with how quickly things are changing, I think the incurious, particularly in the AI world that we're talking about, are going to get left in the dirt. Uh, And curiosity is an interesting thing. Ken Robinson, in his famous TED Talk, right, talked about how schools kill it. And I'm it's one of the things I love seeing in my children. I love seeing my young 15-year-old, my 20-year-old be curious about the world, and they express that a lot because we share a GPT thing. I see what questions they're asking it, and they're asking it really interesting questions about really interesting things, and I believe that's something to be nurtured. So anyway, that's what I like doing, and then I get there's not a lot of money in books, so I get paid to do speeches around the world.
I just wanted to add on curiosity seems to be a trait or a skill, in fact, that many psychologists I've spoken to, they say it is the opposite of depression. And cultivating curiosity is one of the most important things we can do for our mental health. Because if you think about it, when you're at the bottom of that spiral in a dark place, you do lose that curiosity. It feels quite insular. You're just thinking about your own problems rather than looking outside for what's out there in my environment. That's so I love
Yeah,
that
and
idea of you writing a
the
book.
Buddhists cultivate this as well. I did one of my first published works was on spirituality and business. I did a lot of study of Buddhism and mental health, Buddhism and organizational performance. I don't know how much I was a Buddhist, but I was certainly intrigued by it as a philosophy. And they had the idea of the witness about having this, in a
Yeah.
sense, ability to look from without, become curious about how you're feeling and why you might be feeling that. And so rather than being it, you sort of have it. I think that's an interesting So I don't want to give clinical advice, so I just want to kind of say, but here's one of the
Sure.
things that I've had had a life punctuated by depression, um, you know, 50 years, right? And one of the things that I think that I do that helps me to write books and run a company and all this stuff is I don't allow myself to become depressed about being depressed. And I know that sounds kind of weird,
Mm.
but one of the things that can happen with depression is very harsh self-judgments. Failure, nothing matters. And I don't allow myself to get depressed about being depressed or anxious about being anxious. Or I don't take that to the sort of next catastrophic level. I have, in a sense, become friends with it. And I do that with my children too. They may have my psychology when they grow up, they may not. And say we're able to talk about mental health, which, as some of your earlier guests have said, is one of the most important things. They call it the talking cure. They call it talking cure for a reason, right? And so being able to talk about it, so I talk about it to them about their moods. And when I befriend it, and I said it's going to be one of these days. I'm not going to feel like doing anything. And you know what? I don't have to do anything. I'm enough. I've accomplished enough. I don't need to prove anything. If I need to take a day and get a massage and take naps and watch Netflix, it's just fine with me. Now, many people don't have
Hmm.
that luxury but they do have the luxury of being kind to themselves when they're going through these places and focusing on self-care and taking little steps. So my depressive low isn't very low, but it's not infrequent. There'll be a week out of every six. I'll feel
Hmm.
pretty funky, and not get much done. But sometimes buying the groceries, paying the electricity bill, finishing off a couple of paragraphs. In a normal week, I might wish to write a chapter, and in this week, if I write a few paragraphs, that's cool. So anyway, it's a
Hmm.
luxury, but I also think the big message is self-kindness. The Buddhists talk about in mindfulness meditation about developing self-compassion. It's only through developing self-compassion that you can have compassion for the wider humanity. That's an interesting take. So anyway, that's kind of a long-winded way of saying I think curiosity is part of that mix, is being
Yeah.
curious and inquisitive about how we're doing. So I hope
So
you like that.
important.
I didn't
I
want to get all
do.
I didn't want to get all Buddhist on you. But,
No, please do. I go there myself frequently, and I do think that you're right. That curiosity and just going, oh, there's that feeling again, rather than just sinking down the spiral. For many people who have experienced depression over the course of their lives, I also had an interesting 15 years from 20 to about, well, 18 to about 32 or 33, which is interesting.
that
Uh,
was last week. You look young.
Thank you. I'm almost 50, so I
Oh, you
appreciate
really?
that.
Oh my gosh. What's your
But
skincare routine? That would be.
La Roche-Posay, as recommended by dermatologists on my show. No,
You aren't Gwyneth
um,
Paltrow fan for the Summer ice cream. Anyway, carry
no,
on. Sorry about that.
no. People say that sometimes. I'm like, partying in your youth, maybe. I'm not sure.
I didn't
You know,
know that. Anyway,
uh, but yeah, it's certainly being able to just recognize and accept and go, okay, there's that feeling, and it's not the end of the world. I know that I'll overcome it, but not fighting yourself. And as you say, getting to that next level, which is anxiety about anxiety, which is never leads to a good thing, but you learn that through practice.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
Well, I didn't grow up in that culture, and you didn't probably either, because if you're 50, you didn't grow up in a culture where, where we weren't able to really talk about being. We were able to
no,
be angry because we're
yeah,
Irish in my family, but in terms of feeling sadness or
yeah,
loneliness or anxiety or any of the
mhm,
soft underbelly of human emotions, it wasn't really something we could talk
no,
about. We felt them plenty, but we didn't have a place to go with them. And so I arrived in my adulthood never having been able to talk about
yeah,
the softer side because everybody does feel lonely, sad,
yeah,
afraid at some time, maybe often,
yeah.
and without being able to discuss it, without being able to own it,
Mm.
I think you can't take that step. So I think you're in a marvelous spot. Marvelous
Well,
spot.
thank you. Yeah, important, especially for our age group where people are suffering and they were taught to keep feelings out of it and ignore them and just toughen up. Growing up in South Africa
Get
as
up,
a,
big boy. Yeah,
yeah,
pull your
exactly.
big boy pants on and get on with it. Yeah,
Exactly, exactly.
that's what
So,
I was taught to do. Anyway, there you are.
so what triggered your or sparked your interest in AI, and how long have you been
Uh,
following it?
I was a business ethicist. I was a professor of business ethics for a little bit, and 2017, 2018, the World Economic Forum started talking about losing millions of jobs, and then those days it was abstract, like yeah, whatever, someday 2030, 2040,
Yeah.
2050, 2075, and then all of a sudden it's upon us in November 2022. Even though
Mm.
the concept of artificial intelligence was birthed, I don't know, 1954 or something like that.
Yeah.
But here we are, and it's real. This isn't a false dawn, and it's the most interesting thing I have ever studied and been involved in my whole life. The most complex, the most powerful, the most interesting and fascinating thing I've ever been involved with in my life. And went back to university for like 6 degrees, so I say that's a fairly big claim, and it's fascinating at a level from the chips to the machine learning models to the personal use cases, the enterprise use cases, to the ethics of AI. There's just layers and layers and layers of complex. If you look at this picture, these slides that adorn LinkedIn sometimes, there are thousands of applications,
Mm.
healthcare, finance, law, wherever. So it's the most interesting game I've read, and I feel really alive mentally when I read Medium or Substack, which are now my preferred reading on it,
Hmm.
as well as more technical things. I feel really alive and really stimulated mentally. I feel like we could be at the dawn of something very interesting for humankind. And I'm not blind. Half my book is on ethics. So I'm not
Hmm.
blind to some of the BS that we may have to um, confront, manage as a species. And we ain't doing it now. That's crystal clear, right? But so the ethics are fraught, but potential is immense. So that's why
Hmm.
I find myself on the fence when I wrote the book, and now I find myself like I'm a Sam Altman fanboy. Like, hey, this is the best stuff ever. you know, Difference is he's going to make like probably $50 billion out of it, and I'll make
Hmm.
1/10 of 1% of no 1/1000th of 1% of it.
Interesting. But
Yeah,
it is important to consider the ethics, and many people don't. They think, oh well, when I ask ChatGPT whether it would become a robot overlord and rule us, it says no, I'm here to support you, and I'm just a large language model. But you're
yeah,
exactly right. There are some big questions coming up,
yeah.
especially with AI and
Sure you are,
robotics.
Skynet.
Yeah, yeah,
Skynet.
exactly.
Well, I mean, my book is replete with science fiction pictures of Skynet, the guys from the agents from the Matrix. Uh, you know.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
Mm.
But I am in love with what it could do for humanity. And here's an interesting reason. Your listeners may or may not like this, but I mean, I agree with it. But we're a magnificent species. If you read one of the great books of this century, *Sapiens* by Yuval
Yeah.
Harari. The story of how we came to be who we are 100,000 years ago, 200,000 years ago, 500,000 years ago, 50,000 years ago, development of writing 5,000 years ago, how that happened. Because as I say in the book, if you'd been in a spaceship looking at the savannah 100,000 years ago, right? And you'd have seen the zebras and the antelopes and the lions and the cheetahs and the water buffalo and the alligators and all that kind of stuff. And then you'd have seen this hairless mammal huddled around a fire for warmth in small bands of 5 or 6 people. And imagine the guys in the spaceship are having a gamble, have a flutter on who's going to become the apex predator, who's going to basically control the entire planet. And they'd have said, if I had been there, I said, my money's on the cheap. I take the lion. The lion's the odds-on favorite. Those hairless mammals without fangs, without, not particularly fast. Uh, you know, how are they going to do it? And we did it through collaboration and through, well, it's a long and complex story, but collaboration through
Mm.
language, through tool use, through curiosity, I think, through play. There are lots of things that began to pull us up, and then those things became self-reinforcing, and we became who we are today. Because if you look at a lion 100,000 years ago and a lion today, they ain't different. Same with a shark. Sharks are older than us by a long ways, right? A shark is still a
Hmm.
shark. They hadn't changed as far as we know.
Yeah.
They do shark's gonna shark. They do what they've done for half a million years. But here we are, because only 5,000 years ago, I say only 5,000 years ago, right? That, we began to emerge from this, you know, panoply of creatures on the earth to become what we are today. So I'm in love with us. But here's the interesting thing: all of that stuff we did with our own thing, because it was all our thinking, art and architecture and science and philosophy. We were the smartest thing around, and that's a big part of any explanation of how we did what we did. Now we have something around that's smarter than us. Now,
Hmm.
probably half your listeners are howling now. Well, it's not really smart. It's smart in different ways than we are, right? It's much smarter than us in some respects, and much stupider in others. But this is an intelligence which is, roughly speaking, almost beginning to be on par with human intelligence. Maybe
Hmm.
we're 5 years away, or maybe it was 5 years ago, but we're in that thing. And imagine what we can achieve if humanity learns to work alongside this thing. Imagining what we can achieve in science and art, architecture, in exploration. Imagine being able to solve the world problems of poverty, inequality, biosphere degradation, illness. Imagine if we're able to begin to use that intelligence, that shared intelligence, so we have this thing to solve the most important problems. So personally, and I will swear for the first time, I don't give a shit about people making tons of money out of this. I really don't care if it makes answering emails like 25% more efficient, or if
Hmm.
it makes IBM go from 13.3 return on capital to 13.7 return on capital. I don't care about that. Those are trivial and mindless use cases. All right, you can say such things are important. And if you look on LinkedIn, which unfortunately I spend too much time on, but if you look on LinkedIn, these are the things that preoccupy businesses. How are we going to monetize this? And how are we going to generate IRR? I don't give a damn. I think the interesting things lie far outside business.
Mm. Yeah.
And I think using AI and humans in partnership to solve critical problems, and not just solve problems, but realize our most magnificent dreams, whatever those might be, as a species, I think that's inspiring. So that's
Mm.
another reason, is I think with this intelligence alongside us, this could be as important as writing, as important as fire, as important as electricity, which are pretty big deals for humanity. So anyway, that's my. Right now, I do sound like Sam Altman, don't I?
No, but it's good.
I'm
It's,
channeling
you
the
know,
I'm channeling the guy spiritually in a way.
channeling the inner Sam. No, but it is true, and I think that great abundance and prosperity is not far off if we leverage it wisely. Of course, the problem is people developing their own versions, and then who codes the ethics or the values into the AI. Values is an area of great interest to me, considering I
Hmm.
recently wrote a book called Start with Values, and and it did raise the question, what are those foundational values that we should code into, and maybe hard code so that it can't overwrite them, although I'm sure it will be able to. But should it be things like human well-being, and then maybe next is transparency, so we know how it's working and doing what it does, and then maybe the final one is sustainability, like ensure the planet is around. So
Good
coding those
candidate.
into it. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, those types. That's
yeah,
where I
very
got
good
to.
candidate.
But
Yeah,
the dystopia, and maybe you could share some scenarios from your book, is you end up where there are no longer any countries. You just gravitate around DeepSeek and OpenAI, and then they become the two superpower forces in the world. I mean, that is potentially a possibility, I suppose.
well, if
Or
you
what do
read
you
a lot
think?
of sci-fi, as I've spent my time, there are versions of future history where countries are basically pawns, and the world is controlled by 20 to 50 corporations, basically, who own
Yeah,
resources. You know, 3/4 of the planet works for these guys. They've got, you know, and that's not unimaginable. Let's put it that way, right? I mean,
yeah,
corporations are already, in some senses, more powerful than government.
so true.
Um, so
Yeah.
that's the future, and that's to me is a slightly dystopian future, because
Hmm.
I have troubles with that. But yeah, so uh, I don't know, where do you land up on all of this? I mean, I find my people who are in your profession, and there are now. I'm not in your profession anymore. I'm not a coach, not a facilitator, not a workshop, I'm not an educator, something like that. But I do have thousands and thousands of friends from my 30 years in
Mhm.
the industry that are. They're the ones that are most worried about AI. They're actually the most suspicious of it. Is
Yeah.
people with humanistic, human-centered values, I would say, which
Mm.
which I share. Is that what are the people you talking to? What are the people you talking to saying, about it?
This is the interesting thing is it's such a spectrum. Some people, organizations who have the resources are just investing heavily and they're getting AI developers on board and they're
Yeah.
trying to build their own tools, often on the top of existing large language models. It's rare to see someone developing a truly novel, unique AI. Most are building it on top of other technologies. And then you've got people just resisting,
Why would
going,
it cost hundreds of millions of dollars to build robots?
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. And then others are building very rudimentary tools and going, yeah, we're AI. And it's kind of like, yeah, you've just automated emails or as you
yeah,
said
yeah.
before.
Ooh,
And then there's many resisting who are just saying, too dangerous, data privacy, we don't trust
sure,
it.
sure.
And I mean, I shudder when I hear things like my niece who just finished a chartered accountant's degree, her professors were saying, never use it, it hallucinates, it's dangerous.
Well,
I was
they're
like,
idiots, but anyway.
if you're an accountant, you want
Yeah,
to be a power user because if
yeah,
you're not a power user, it's going to make you redundant.
yeah. It's funny how quick
Mm.
kids adopt this, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah. I mean,
while my professional friends, management consultants, pretty smart cookies, a lot of them, um, my kids were all over it way, way before them, way, way in 2023. My kids were beginning to use it. You know why? Because they're curious about stuff. They're curious
mhm.
about this. They're curious about the world. So unfortunately, the bad side of that is things like TikTok, which can fuel
Oof.
curiosity in
Yeah.
probably unhelpful manner or something like that. But I mean, I think um, I see the questions they ask it. What do they ask it today? My son is a sort of he's not going to probably be a rapper, but he makes rap music or something like that. He uses it for all his music production. He uses it to kind of improve his lyrics. He uses it for partnerships. He uses it all over his creative endeavors, not as a crutch or as a substitute. Because where's the fun in that? If you're a
Mhm.
creative stuff, if you're a musician, a lyricist, a poet, a writer, an artist. Where's the fun in having something do that work for you? It's like a
Agree.
stupid thing. Well, you're going to
Mm.
go get a degree in art and then have AI do all your art for you? Come on. Like that sounds fairly ridiculous. So I'm excited about that. AI in art is a whole other conversation. AI in therapy, by the way, I'm sure you've seen the number one use case that Harvard Business Review or Harvard Business School published this paper. It's not based on a huge sample size. We're still early days. Something like the number one personal use case is, I bet therapists.
Yeah. Yep.
That to me is astonishing to me.
Mhm.
And some people are horrified. I bet you know a few.
I
I'm
do know a
actually
few.
really,
Do
yeah.
you?
That are horrified? Yeah, well, most of LinkedIn is horrified. I'm actually really excited about it.
I love it.
I'm
I use
actually,
it myself.
I use it myself. I use it as a life coach. I tell you,
Yeah.
I had 50 coaches working for me. It's as good as all of them.
Same.
Uh, so, um, and interesting, like, I wonder if coaches of the year 2030 will be working, I can almost see like working in part. I don't know how that evolves, but it's very interesting. It's the number one use case. Some people find that horrifying. There's two reasons I don't find it horrifying. One is access. So executive coaches charge anywhere from $500 to $2,000 an hour, right?
Yeah.
My ex-wife charges $1,200 an hour. She's an executive coach. She's very good. She's worth $1,200 an hour. I'll leave it to our clients to assess that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, a therapist, I don't know, a Fifth Avenue psychiatrist, I don't know, $500, $600 an hour. I don't know what they charge. Just an garden variety 2-year degree in counseling from, a small university, a diploma in humanistic counseling, for example, which I happen to have, but whatever, they might charge $200 an hour, right? So not everybody can afford that. So that's one of the great things for me is it provides access. And now we're talking about the
Hmm.
United States or where I happen to live or something like that. But you think about that, whether you're in rural India or rural Uganda or something like this, is having that as a resource. And people, and this is not yet tested and proven and scientifically validated, actually find it safer
Yeah.
initially. Because
Mhm.
telling another human being about your vulnerabilities and your fears and your distress and your anxiety and your angst and your depression. I mean, some people don't tell their wives, right? Partners. I had two guys working side by side. They were on the board of a company, and I was doing coaching for like 10 of them when they were all on the board of the company. I'm talking to one guy. He talked to me while he's going through. I said, buddy, here's the thing. Have you ever thought about depression? Maybe because some of this sounds like it could be. I'm not a clinician. This is not a diagnosis, but this is something you want to. He says, you think it could be it? I said, I think it could be it. A week later, I'm talking to one of his pals, sits next to him. Buddy, that sounds a lot existential angst, self-loathing, self-doubt, all those things. I'm not eating, I can hardly sleep, my relationships are all screwed, or whatever, right? Have you ever thought like these guys sat next to each other? They've never discussed this with each other. I thought if people
Yeah.
would only learn to talk to one another, they put me out of a job, and gratefully so. So I think access is an important thing. Is having thing. Now, do we need guardrails? Yes, because one of the things it does that they're working on now is sycophancy. And you don't want
Mm.
something to be a sycophant if you're thinking about self-harm.
Mhm. Yep.
So I'm thinking about jumping off a bridge. You don't want to say, wow, that's good. How tall? You don't want
Great
that.
idea. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why did
Yeah.
I think of that? No, you don't want that. I mean, all therapists will, generally speaking, taking a supportive stance towards your thoughts, not that they approve or validate or agree with, but they won't like necessarily push hard and say you're full of shit. Right?
Mhm.
They won't do that. However, when it comes to self-harm or harming other people's, they have a duty of moral responsibility, in some cases a legal responsibility if it comes to hurting others. And I think, if it's going to develop as a coach and therapist, and most absolutely certainly will, and I think it's most absolutely certainly a good thing, is it will need to have those kind of red flag guardrails around self-harm or helping others,
Yeah.
and other stuff too. So um, yeah, so that's very important. So this isn't an unproblematic area, but it's potentially a really exciting area from the point of view of access. From the point of view of efficacy, they've evaluated like human therapists versus AI therapists. The AI therapists do just as well. Now, again, this is early days in the days of chatbots. So we'll see how this pans out. We'll see what more research says. This is just a few studies, a few people, but people rate the LLM support as highly as they do as they rate the human therapist in a controlled trial. Like they don't know who they're talking to, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
that's pretty cool. I think that's pretty
That
cool
is cool.
because actually, I mean, someone liking something doesn't mean it's useful, but actually in therapy, rapport with therapists, trust in therapists, respect and liking for therapists is actually material in affecting outcomes. That level of relationship relatedness thing. So the fact that they like it is actually kind of a positive therapeutic indicator. Anyway, I got on too long about that. So that I think it's fascinating development, and I'm guardedly enthusiastic about it. And I've
Yeah.
just gotten thrown out of LinkedIn.
No, I agree. And in fact, I recommend it in workshops from time to time. I'll say, look, if you're dealing with a specific challenge, don't be afraid of just popping that into ChatGPT or your favorite AI and ask it to help you using an approach like acceptance and commitment therapy, for example.
For
And it
example,
will
right?
walk you through the process in an
Absolutely, it's very good
amazing
at
way.
very, very good at
Mhm.
that. And tell you what, you can always ignore it, right? You have my permission to ignore it if you don't like what it
Yeah.
says, but see what it says.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
As a health coach, it has been amazing. I put in all of my metrics, and it
Oh, do you?
has
You're one of
created
those.
a. Well, I've gone all in. I'm like, what
You're
would you
quantifying,
do
you're
to
quantifying self.
optimize health? And here's everything. Here's the data from my Aura Ring, and here's my
Yeah,
supplement
yeah,
stack. And it organized things, and it found
yeah.
certain issues. It was like, oh, you shouldn't be taking that supplement close to this one because this one reduces your
Sure,
iron levels. And so
sure, sure,
it's
sure.
amazing. And then
I do the same
here's
thing,
hit,
and it's far better than
yeah,
my doctor's. Far
way
better,
better. Yeah,
way better.
exactly.
I mean, I see a cardiologist, right? I don't have anything particularly acutely wrong with me or something like that. But I'm an old guy. I've been overweight um, a lot of my life. So I see a cardiologist or something like that. This thing, I put in all my data, all my
Yeah.
EKGs, all my MRIs, all my scans, all my
Yeah.
blood work and everything like that. And I tell her, like, okay, buddy, what's up? Pages. You ask
Yeah.
your cardiologist, you say, oh, you're doing fine, buddy. See you in a year.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
not quite caricature as well, but it gives you really comprehensive answers. Would you like me to set some checkpoint reminders for November so that you can get a follow up here? Would you like to
Mm.
consider whether taking creatine might be a good thing for stopping sarcopenia, muscle
Yeah.
wastage
Yeah.
in older people? So I use it for workouts. I've actually been in my I do yoga before. I'm pretty nasty on the body, something like that. I said I need a
Is it?
25-minute routine, man. Shoot it up. All right, it'll give me a 25-minute yoga routine.
Hmm.
I need to use it to remind me to meditate.
Why is poker hard on the body?
You sit for 14 hours a day.
Okay, it's all this
No, your body is not
sedentary.
designed. Your body is not designed to do that. Not
I
only do you have to sit
see.
for hours, you have to be focused for 19 hours a day. You have to
Yeah.
be, you have to be like, like locked in and as alert as you can possibly, as alert and as focused and as present as you can manage. So all of the best players in the world, people who are making tens of $1 million a year playing poker, all of them meditate, do yoga, have insanely restrictive health routines, some of them. Um, so it's like being a top athlete at anything is you need to take care of, if I forgive you the use of this word, the machine, because otherwise good luck, right? At the very highest level. And I do play close to the very highest level when I
Hmm.
compete in poker.
Can AI help you with your poker skills?
That's most definitely. It's
Mm.
certainly good at coaching me and setting a structure from my learning because, like in top athletes in any domain, you got to spend 3, 4, 5 hours a day. When I'm in the study zone, it's 3, 4, 5 hours a day of studying. How often does a ballet dancer? How often do they practice versus how long they perform? Well, they'll probably practice 6 to 8 hours a day or something like that, and they, probably perform 2. And that's the kind of ratio in business. This is one of my hobby horses, by the way. In business, it's like, I mean, the average number of training and development days is for an employee in the United States a year. Have a
Oh.
guess. Have a guess. What do you think? What's the average number?
You would hope it's around 10.
Yeah, don't be silly. It's
What are we looking at?
it's 5, but that includes mandatory compliance
Oh,
training,
yeah,
you
right.
know, offsite piss ups,
Yeah.
the conference, where everybody around, those sorts of they're quasi learning events, but they're not,
Mm.
um, compliance, mandatory compliance training, all kinds of things. So in terms of actually learning something new, like, hey, say for example, AI or something like that, there might be a day or two. And in fact, I ran a workshop for 12 guys who are partners at a professional services firm running the corporate finance part of the professional services firm. I said, how many days training did you do last year? Hold up fingers. Like there were 2 fingers among 12 people for how many days they
Hmm.
did last year. It's pitiful. And when it comes to new technology adoption, by the way, this is another hobby horse of mine, something like that. The ignorance at the top is unacceptable. You can't really run an organization and say you're going to deploy AI to maximize whatever you want to maximize, right? Customer service, profitability, yada yada, whatever you want to do. If you're unwilling to take the plunge yourself and spend, I don't know, read the 10 most important books or
Yeah.
go on the 2-week course at Harvard if that's your preferred learning style or whatever it is, or have a structured way of following and use AI for this, by the way, structured curriculum on YouTube or edX or Coursera or some way or another of not being this ignorant guy. Because it's not okay for you as a chief executive to say, y'all mother need to adopt
Hmm.
AI. And oh, by the way, I'm cooked. I'm good. Like
Yeah.
that's stupid. That's stupid. Unfortunately, that's paradigmatically true. Is that's what leaders do. The
Yes.
number of days that you spend developing yourself goes down, perhaps
Mm.
at a sharper decline than that. And the attitude, the tacit, no one would ever say this, right? But some people who are very senior in organizations, 50, 55 years old, say, if I don't know it by now, it's probably not that important. I mean, it's mind-boggling, the sort
Mm.
of willful ignorance that I see at the top of organizations. And again, it's curiosity. Like they're just incurious,
Hmm.
and they fake it. once you get to the top of a business, you're a guy, 50 woman, 55 years old, you're very, very good at bullshitting. You're very, very good at pretending you know what you're talking about, even when you have
It's
no
so
idea. Of
true.
course you are. Of course you are.
Yeah.
Consulting partners that I would work with, they could fake it in anything. And sometimes, you have the experts sitting back there and going, "Oh, I wish you hadn't said that." But, you know,
Yeah.
I find that scary because the world is going to go to the hungriest learners. There's
Yes.
no question to me in this new era. It's probably always been true to some extent or another. I think it's particularly true now. So
Hmm.
believe
That's a
me or
good
don't believe me.
observation because I
Haven't
know
you
I
seen?
come.
You must have seen that, right? I mean,
Well, yeah, companies
they-
come to me and say, we want to build a resilient workforce, but those on the C suite do not care. They're like, we're going to continue exactly as we are. We're not going to sleep more. We're not going to be more positive. We're not going to practice growth
sure.
mindset. But everyone else should. And, you certainly can help those beneath them to improve their quality of life. But it's when the C suite comes on board and says, you know what, we're all with you. We're going to stop sending emails at 1 a.m. We're going to work together more cohesively. We're going to create space for recovery. Then the organization comes on board and you actually see some real
Sure.
change. And it's the
And
same with
whatever you're
AI.
trying to do, it's not just
Yeah.
wellness and mental health, but whatever you're trying to achieve.
Yeah. Yeah.
You should start at the top, but they don't. And
Well,
I'll tell you,
no.
there's a thing in my book on the the six the anti-learning organization is the name of this particular section of the book. And I've more or less been around learning and development or in learning and development 35 years. More important. Sometimes it's
Yeah.
coaching, sometimes it's lots of training courses, whatever. It's been 20 years. Leaders do the wrong thing, so they don't model it. So they're like, we want to create a learning organization. We're going to start 6 layers down. The second thing, managers do the wrong thing. So instead of managers taking someone and saying, all right, well, these are your performance objectives for your year, where are your learning objectives? Okay, well, that's already better than many. Like, what are you going to be much, much better at the end of 2026 than you are today? Do you know what you need to learn to be able to progress
Mm,
yourself in your career and to be able to improve your ability to fulfill your role here? Because if you're not clear about that, then you're just, so that's setting learning objectives. But the other thing they do is they object. Have you ever heard of a manager saying, do you really need to go on that training course? We're kind of busy right now. Can you put it off? Yeah. That's right. Do you really need to do that 1 week course on whatever it might be? Artificial intelligence, or it could be emotional intelligence, or it
mm,
could be, whatever. Do you really need to go on that? Do you need to go on it now? Because so they do managers do the opposite. They sort of almost like actively kind of like resist, losing employee days. Or this is particularly, I think, maybe acutely true in the United States. Um, so this thing, and then, I mean, I could go on and on. There are sort of 6 dimensions of this anti-learning organizations, and it's frightening to me. And it's one of the reasons, by the way, that I think these hot young startups of 10, 20, 50 people do so well
yeah.
is because they're learning as fast as they're producing, because you have to if you're in a small 10, 20, 50 person organization. So it's one of my sort of pet theories about why, because everyone always wonders, like, why are these startups growing? You know, why is it so difficult to affect change in an IBM or a General Electric or, Anglo De Beers or whatever, Anglo American or De Beers? Why is it hard to get them to move? Why does it sometimes look like it's easier if we want to do something new just to start another company?
Hmm.
Wonder why that is. Well, a lot of answers to that question, but one of them can be about the pace of learning and learning adaptation, curiosity, all that kind of stuff.
Mm,
I
yeah.
do want to say something about resilience, though. I know that
Please.
it's a topic that's really close to your heart, and there's very little that's more important than helping humans at work or at home to deal with setbacks in their life, whether they be emotional setbacks or, um, you know, we've talked about depression, anxiety, whatever it is, whether it be losing a job, losing a partner, one way or the other, divorce or loss. One of those setbacks in life, they will befall you all, and being, of course, resilient, being able to bounce is critical. I know that's an imprecise definition, but let's leave that alone for the moment.
It's
But
pretty
one of
good.
the things that worries me in the systems
Mm,
that we live in is the onus is on the individual to be resilient.
mm,
We're not building resilient systems. So I think about someone in an abusive relationship, say it's a woman or a man, right? And you want to help them develop resilience, but what you're really doing is helping them to, survive, get by in an oppressive system. Are you serving a woman or a man who comes to you who's in an abusive relationship and giving them resilience skills, other than the skill of saying GTFOH, as the kids say today, like
yeah.
get out of Dodge, get out of the system. And so I think that's true in organizations as well. When we start to talk about EAPs or all of the great resilience work you do or something like that, I have a worry um, that teaching people to be resilient in an oppressive system or in a toxic system.
Yeah.
I would say I don't work for a workplace right now, and I don't do a ton of consulting, so I don't get around as much as I used to. Almost everybody I speak to is suffering right now,
Yeah.
suffering really badly. I hear stories, but the three or four people who I do talk to about what's going on at work, they're not doing very well. And these are good, smart, professional people with dozens of years of experience. And the environment around it. When I worked for a big company a few years ago, something like that was the most toxic place I've ever worked. The way people
Mm,
talked about one another behind their back, the way people behave towards one another, it's just never. I hadn't worked in a 9 to 5 organization for 25 years since 2000. I joined one thinking it would be better or different or more evolved, and I was shocked to find out it was worse than I could have imagined.
yeah.
Certainly worse than I encountered in the 1990s. And I just wonder about that. I don't really have my feelers out in the corporate world as much as I used to. 'Cause I'm kind of over consulting. I do a tiny bit of coaching here and there, but I'm over consulting. But really, like, is that the way the world is? I
Mm,
mean, that's a small sample, right? It's like 5 or 10 people I talk to. I mean, what are you seeing? Like, I hear these
yeah.
horror stories about toxic workplaces, and
I,
I feel I'm not doing a service. I was saying to someone like, "Oh, you need to be more resilient," because no, you wouldn't. No, that's not what you need to do. You need to get out of there.
yeah.
What do you
I,
think about this, the resilience
I,
guy? Because
I see it, and there are many use cases for resilience. My preference is a company that is building
mm,
a high performing team, but the key ingredient is rest and recovery. And if the
mhm,
company or the system doesn't create space for people to rest and recover, then resilience is not going to solve the problem. You
mhm,
can grit your way through for a certain amount of time, and then people
yeah,
burn out. And it's something like 50% of people are burnt out or are close to it at the moment,
yeah,
depending
about
on which
100% of the
studies.
people I talk to, but yeah,
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And
yeah,
you go, well, is it the values of the organization? So many companies have these fake values and they say, we're all about teamwork and courage and innovation. But the reality is it's just profit. Like
yeah.
everything is built around that. And then
You're
it feels
interested in
inauthentic.
squeezing the last spark of life out of your employees, more like.
Exactly, exactly. So
Yeah.
I think there are use cases
Then
for
they worry about like
resilience.
why we're not innovating or why we're not creative enough or why we have these bad attrition rates. So they worry about these kind of symptoms,
Yeah, exactly.
like a thing, and they don't worry about like themselves as a root cause. Like
Yeah,
the problem
that's right.
starts with you, bro. It's you, bro, not
Uh,
them,
uh, and
not it.
and
It's you.
the other unfortunate pattern that I'm noticing is individuals who are not disconnecting from their devices. So many people have developed addiction to social media and to being hyper vigilant, always on, and so
Yeah.
now you have these two.
I've just checked.
You've got these two forces colliding. You've got the
Yeah.
pursuit of profit, and you've got people who are just so fragmented. And I'm interested in your thoughts on this. In the age of AI, people are burning out their attention capacity because they are just fragmented, multitasking. Apparently, Gen Z just entering the workforce can maintain focus for about 8 seconds, also called the TikTok brain. So we're not helping ourselves, but at the same time, the system is not helping us. And that's a problem.
I don't know how to solve this problem. I'm kind of maybe too complacent about the social media problems. I mean, I think first of all, technology is not that old, right?
Yeah.
And this is the first generation who've been sort of drenched in it. But what
Yes.
I really hope is I don't ban TikTok, and my kids have had phones since they were 9. I don't restrict what they do or anything like that. I'd say, there's a lot of toxic shit out there. You do yourself a favor and don't look at any of it. If
Yeah.
you want to, you know, thing, but it's not going to do you any good. And they don't. But I think about things like TikTok, and what I would really like is for them to say, that's just such a waste of my freaking time. I'd rather do something useful.
Exactly.
And that's
Yes.
what happened to me. I got to say, with Facebook, I used it a lot 15 years ago to connect with
Me
people around the
too.
world, friends, family, or something like that. I have no time for it today. I have
Yeah,
no time
same.
today for LinkedIn either. I
Mm.
have no time for the social side of social media. Now, if I can't sleep, I have been known to doom scroll for an hour on Instagram and,
We all have.
look at, DJs or, whatever. I mean, most of my people I follow on Instagram are DJs or something like that. But
Mm.
yeah, I'd rather they get sick of it. There's two ways to sort of, this is a fucking binary stupid model, but anyway, there's two ways. Like it's like if you want to stop doing something, one of the ways is to break the habit, but the other way is to get yourself so many good habits that you don't have time for the bad habits.
Yeah.
Like if you're the habit of running, meditating, and eating properly, spending time with your children, if those are your habits, you won't have time for the other stuff. And I do hope that um, my kids will move towards doing enough productive, good, purposeful, meaningful, joyful stuff. I don't find TikTok like, oh yeah, look at that. I used to look at that when I was a teenager, but I just really don't. I'm not interested in what
Yeah.
Charlie Kirk has to say about
Mm.
whatever. But there is and there's a lot of content in there. It's particularly targeted. I have two men. I have a 20-year-old and a 15-year-old, and there is target. They talk about the sort of targeting of that these groups of young men and how
Yeah.
young men's values are shifting
Mm.
in ways that, from my point of view, are retrogressive. Right? In fact, they're not retrogressive as the values I grew up with in the 70s or 80s. These sort of this what masculinity looked like in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
It's like, why are we going back to that? Like we were in
Mm.
a space where being a man was being able to be nurturing, kind, protective, and all of these kind of a mixture of archetypal feminine and masculine values, and we were looking for a more holistic concept of manhood. And now I see these, excuse my French again, assholes on social media broadcasting and advocating a sort of masculinity that really went out of fashion in the 80s and 70s because people used to, unfortunately, behave terribly badly towards women in those
Mm.
days,
Mm.
awfully. I mean, I worked in the stuff I saw on Wall Street in the 1980s would makes my skin crawl today.
Really.
At the,
Mm.
grabbing women physically in the elevators, accosting them in the hallways and stairwells, ridiculing them for anatomical features that they had or didn't have. This is standard on Wall Street, absolutely standard. um, Awful sexual jokes, the kind that would make me blush today, and I'm no shrinking violet. This is kind of standard practice. And from my point of view, we moved beyond that, and I haven't seen that again. And a lot of the stuff that I, sadly, was sometimes complicit in, something like that is horrifying to me. And now there's a group of people who are advocating some sort of return to
Yeah.
those sorts of values. I find that incredible. I'm sorry, that's kind of like really preachy, but I find it so objectionable. I thought,
Mm.
I was ideal. I thought we'd left behind, racism, homophobia, nativism, nationalism, misogyny, abuse. I thought, honestly, we'd begun to turn the corner on all of that.
Yeah.
And I think I must be living in a fantasy world because it seems to me that that's not only not the case, but we're driving the car in reverse now.
Mm.
So I'm sorry, that's very kind of political and it's kind of whatever.
No,
And it's
not at
probably
all.
not what
But
listeners want to hear. But anyway,
it is an interesting yeah, regression towards those types of values, which I also thought were, why can't people just be kind to each other and support each other and have a good time? We don't need to promote and champion the Andrew Tate kind of values,
I
this
didn't
kind of
want
thing.
to mention
Yeah.
the SOB's name, but I mean, things like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's someone who's deified by a certain frag
Yeah.
who thinks he's been hard done by. Poor guy. Like,
Yeah.
but these people are all over, and they're all over in milder forms than Andrea. I mean, he's particularly toxic, and probably
Yeah.
but they're social media is full of those kind of influences, and all I can do with my children is teach them a way to discern. Like my kid sent
Hmm.
me a thing by Charlie Kirk, who's I don't know, he says like far right, sort of neo-Nazi, neo-native, neo-racist, neo-misogynist kind of guy in America. He has a ton of airtime. He sent me something by him, and I said, go into ChatGPT,
Hmm.
post in the transcript of what you've just seen. It's very easy to do. Click, click, or something
Hmm.
like that, and ask GPT to parse it for you and become curious because he's spewing a lot of facts and everything like that. Fact check it and look at the analysis. He was basically saying there's more black people in prison because the population of America is like 12% black. He said 58% of the prison population is black, right? So ergo, what are you trying to conclude there, bro? Where's that leading you? Is there,
Mm.
inherently more likely? Is it part of the, I mean, I can't begin to describe his reasoning process. I told my kids go check it out and use artificial intelligence to check it out. Stick that in ChatGPT. ChatGPT wrote him a 3 or 4 page like facts he got wrong, and this is the interpretation, and this is what he's missing, and he's missing causality, and he's looking at correlation, and and
Yeah.
something I can get him a very fulsome response. So I try not to say don't ever listen to Charlie Kirk. I mean, it's not a bad rule, but anyway, I was trying to say like be doubly vigilant and have enough, metacognition, enough self-awareness
Hmm.
of the world to know when you need to check something. And I'm grateful the kids do that. I'm grateful because that I don't think you and I or whomever. One of the things that my friends on the left try to do is they try to put a stopper in that kind of stuff. Like if we can prohibit it, if we can ban it, if we can
Yeah.
cancel it, if we can do it. I don't think you ever can. But what we can hopefully do is create youngsters in the case of being a parent or workplaces in terms of being a leader where such things are just seen for being ridiculous. That
Yes.
someone can no more listen to an Andrew Tate thing just because they find it repulsive. And that's what I'd like to, think. And that's what I'd like to do also with social media is have people be discerning enough where they don't have time for the bullshit. They
Yeah.
don't have time for the fake news. They don't have time for the toxic masculinity. They don't have time for Gwyneth Paltrow's $700 face creams or whatever she's selling these days.
Yeah.
I mean, quite.
No,
Anyway,
absolutely.
I don't know.
Well,
We wandered around. I hope this is satisfactory from the point of view of your listeners and
uh,
everything like that.
absolutely, absolutely. No, and I think using AI for that purpose, just for a little bit of your own sanity, fact check things, get a different perspective, hugely valuable. And it's really easy to download a transcript from
And
any
it's the most
video.
important meta skill for today. It's just such an
I-
important meta skill for today. Oh, you can post a video
exactly.
right into it. You can just put the Instagram link in ChatGPT and say, parse
Yeah,
what you just said. You don't
yeah,
have to
it's
do the
pretty
transcript.
awesome. Okay,
Yeah, it's
I didn't
amazing.
know that. Nice.
Yeah,
One
yeah,
last
yeah.
question.
Mhm.
Spirituality, wisdom, how important is it that we reconnect with wisdom traditions? We mentioned Buddhism at the start. From your perspective, in the age of AI, maybe we do need more wisdom rather than intelligence.
Well, I kind of read a book on it, but it only sold 7 copies. In fact, I
Oh,
think it's some of my best, most innovative writing. It's called The Spirituality of Work and Leadership. It's probably might be my best book. I swear, I don't know how many copies it sold, hundreds. Spirituality, work, and leadership, not something that people do. One of the things I think is we've imported a lot of words from the spiritual tradition. So vision, for example,
yes. I
there's
didn't
a
think
lot
of
of,
that. Yeah.
but now it's not seen as being, but when it was first used. Um,
Yeah.
I'm quite excited about it. I mean, I don't follow a particular tradition myself. I'm sort of more of a humanist. There was a time when that wasn't true, when I followed all of them. I think one of the things that we need to take away from those is purpose. And it links back to the conversation on depression. So when I feel the most depressed, what's generally missing is a sense of purpose.
Yeah.
I feel alive and excited when I'm talking to guys like you, working on artificial intelligence, doing things that make me come alive, that feel purposeful and meaningful.
Hmm.
When that's taken away from me is when I'm at my lowest. I need to reconnect with what matters to me. And so I think that's kind of an interesting thing. So there's quite a lot around purpose, around job selection, picking jobs that have spiritual meaning for you. maybe different for you than for me than from someone from Oklahoma. That's just fine with me. But have something that connects. Have a job in life. You know the ikigai thing, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't. Is sort of one quadrant of that. I mean, the ikigai in my book. I mean, there are good things and bad things about it, but one of the things is doing what matters, right?
Mm.
Doing purposeful, meaningful work, and so I think that's something that we need to recapture. It wasn't always the case in with traditional religion, though. Um, there's a long story here, but religion wasn't always a friend to the working man. Let's put it that way. Um,
Mm.
I think we talked a little bit about Buddhism. I think there's much to learn there. Buddhism is an interesting doctrine because there's no pledges you have to sign. There are no
Yeah.
tithes or anything like that. You
Yeah.
can pick or choose what you like from the philosophy. I think the thing that the Buddhists I admire most is the practice of mindfulness, meditation, self-compassion, practicing loving kindness. Those aren't bad things. And I don't call yourself, you call yourself a Buddhist or whatever you call yourself, right?
Mm.
Those are useful things. So I think there's a lot in those. And what we have to remember is 21st century psychologists or people that are kind of traveling in the workplace psychology, people have been talking about this stuff for a long time. And so I don't wish to discard anything from the wisdom traditions of that, including Christianity, Judaism, and
Yeah.
Islam, including some of the New Age stuff, including Buddhism and Taoism. I mean, I think there's enough there. There's enough wisdom in there. It'd be foolish and arrogant and unhumble to discard all of that stuff. I mean, some of these
Yeah.
guys from my own historical tradition, Aquinas, Augustine, you know, they're really good thinkers, and they had quite a lot to say about what it means to be human, and what it means to be fulfilled, and what it means to be successful, and what it means to be devotional, and what it means to be kind. So I would like workplaces to kind of recapture some of that. And I also am a hard atheist, so I don't. I think I want the wisdom of some of that stuff, but some of the dogma, and that's where I'd
Mm.
like to see us kind of progress as a world. Is not throw that. A lot of my atheist buddies would just throw the Bible out with the bathwater, the baby out with the bathwater. uh, and I think there's much to learn,
There is.
from.
Yeah.
So I'd like us to remain curious. But maybe the book's called Spirituality, Work, and Leadership. Maybe after this podcast, we'll sell two more copies. It's actually it talks about all of this kind of stuff, and there's also a notion that is kind of thing called the gospel of work, which is a medieval idea, but you also see strains of it in the United States where work is kind of deified and sacred. So working hard is a
Yeah.
virtue of its own right. Now, if I said that to an average American, they say, of course, working hard is a virtue. And I said, well, okay, who says? There are times and there are philosophers in life who have said, like, leisure is,
Exactly.
so. And then if you do embrace the gospel of work idea and work as being sacred, which, I mean, maybe no one would say that, but they act as if it were, what do you give up when work occupies the position of the sacred or the deity or the all important in your life? Are you giving anything up, like your mental health, like your family, like your community, like your well being? So when you reify work or deify work, is to be a better word for it, something like that, what are you giving up as a value? And so there's interesting stuff on the gospel of work, which I think merits reading. Anyway, whatever. That I hope that was stimulating. I hope that was stimulating for some people.
Absolutely. You've planted a lot of seeds, and I'm sure people will go and explore these different ideas. It's been fantastic being able to explore lots of different ideas in just one short hour.
I
Where would you
didn't,
like
I
people to
didn't,
go?
I didn't, I didn't swear, which is something of a miracle. That's probably the longest I've ever gone without swearing. I think is that an hour?
Yeah, it is. It is. We'll have to do a part
No,
two to get those
my kids
to
are not going
get.
to believe it if I tell them I was going an hour without swearing today.
I love it. Where would you like people to go if they would like to check out your work?
Oh, paulgibbons.net.
Perfect.
Has just lists of all the books and pictures of me on stages and blah 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 blah, all that kind of stuff. I do make my money keynote speaking. It's mostly on AI, but as you
Yeah.
perhaps tell, I have other interests in the world. I think the interesting thing is where AI meets these things is where some of the
Yes.
very
Yes.
interesting stuff is happening in the world. So Paul Gibbons on that's probably the one-stop shop for all things spoken.
Perfect.
And you can
Any
follow me on LinkedIn, and I have a YouTube channel and yada yada, all that kind of stuff.
we'll put all of those links in the show notes so people do check them out. Any final thoughts for those who stuck with us all the way to the end?
Good golly. Any final thoughts? Lead a purposeful life, remain curious, and above all, be kind and self-compassionate to yourself. How about that?
I like that.
How about that? Wisdom in a bottle, wisdom in a nutshell.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a real
Pleasure.
pleasure. We set out with the objective of having some fun. I certainly did. I hope you did as well. And
You did. You did. Good stuff.
thanks, everyone. We'll see you in the next episode.